Today, and our limelight right now, touching on the Embakasi gas explosion, is the regulator. Did they do their job or they didn't? We've gone through some of the statements prior to our break, and right now I'd like to go through one more slide. Let's take a look at the next slide, because there is an element in there, even in this one, this issue of all licensed, which becomes very critical. So they say administrative actions are always taken to ensure that operating licenses for all plants are rated below the high safety integrity status are revoked. So they go check if your levels are lower, they get revoked. In addition, surveillance and enforcement actions are taken, including demolishing illegal plants. All right? So I want you to take note of two things. First of all, the prior slide, I want you to take note of the first thing, of which is, if you can just take a look at the previous slide kindly. Thank you very much. One thing is this issue of illegal plants, okay? Because EPRA is supposed to demolish them. Did they demolish this particular plant? EPRA have a lot of questions to answer. Secondly, it's this issue of they do a detailed technical audits of all licensed LPGs, okay? Because that can be used as a foot to say, okay, these ones are not licensed, so they might not be on our radar. But somebody tried to apply to get permission to build something, and because of safety standards, they didn't qualify, so you didn't give them that particular permission or permit, as you call it. And after that, no follow-up. So they proceed and just set up the plant. EPRA, help us understand this. And I want to bring in Ken Gishinga. Ken, the importance of regulation in such a market. I know there are so many variables in this, but looking at this statement by the regulator, what do you make of it?
The importance of the regulator is quite critical in ensuring safety and good order in the economy. And looking at that statement, you see attempts by the regulator, but clearly there are loopholes that have been exposed. And these are the same loopholes that are exposed across all other regulatory aspects. And in an economy, Noah, where people are constantly looking for money, where the lure for money is so great, regulatory enforcement is very difficult. And that's why the issues of building permits, you're always seeing buildings collapsing, people asking who issued the permit. You go to clubs, you'll find the shisha being sold, yet it's considered an illegal product, yet it's sold everywhere. It's because the lure of money is always presents a clear and present danger to the regulatory environment. So it's really about how do we strengthen the regulators from this lure that is presented to them on a daily basis. Because if we do not solve this problem, we might go the Lebanon way. You remember, Noah, in Lebanon about 2 years ago, there was an extremely huge blast that took away the lives of so many Lebanese. And that was really attributed to corruption that had really decayed parts of the city. So it's very important that people link corruption to security and to their health. Otherwise, if we lose this war, it can pose a greater risk to ourselves.
Definitely. I'm glad you've noted the issue of compromise. I remember, was it the previous regime? One of the statements that came out was that we are losing, is it 2 billion a day? The then president says, "Sasa mnataka nifanye nini?" And that seems to be the notion that majority of Kenyans we've taken. I mean, we know there are loopholes. What do we do about that? And as you've rightly put it, it's very critical for us to strengthen regulators and regulation, make them, influence proof. Because everyone, if you have the right way, you can find your way through. And what do I mean? I want you to bring us to the next statement. And this is from the Petroleum Institute. They've given a statement in regards to the Embakasi gas explosion. If you can take a look at that statement by the Petroleum Institute of East Africa. I know it looks a little bit, because it's very wordy at the same time and not very clear on our screens, but I will be able to read through. Now, because the first paragraph, standing with those who've been hurt from this particular situation. But the second paragraph, following our visit at the site soon after the explosion and early morning today, we've established that this is the same site where a criminal case was instituted against the proprietor of this facility and some of his clients. Okay? And when was this criminal case instituted, you ask yourself? On November 9th, the year 2020. This is the COVID years, the COVID times. Now we're talking about post-COVID recovery. This criminal case was during that time. Now, the case goes on for some years. And they've even placed there the case number E3776/2020 at Milimani Courts in Nairobi. Now, all the accused persons were found what? Ask yourself, repeat after me. They were found guilty. Okay? And what happened? Convicted. Within a sentence issued on the 18th of May 2023, just last year. The perpetrators of this particular proprietor and some of the customers where the explosion has happened last night, they were found guilty of a criminal case in the year 2023, the month of May, the date 18th. Now, despite guidance from the High Court on the mandatory minimum sentencing of 5 years in prison or a penalty of 10 million shillings. 10 million shillings. Look at this penalty. Look at the time to be served. It shows the severity of this particular case and this particular crime, because it was a criminal case. That was a criminal entity. Now, the learned magistrate, they had to put that because it's a legal term. The learned magistrate of the court number 11, don't know what court that is, imposed total fines of 500,000 or a 1 year imprisonment instead of 20 million or 5 years for the proprietor, that is the first accused, and a fine of 50,000 for the second accused instead of a fine of 10 million or 5 years. That is for the customers or clients of this particular proprietor. So, in Europe, okay, let me just visualize this. In Europe, we are having the Embakasi blast situation, but we are roping an institution called Judiciary. How did this happen? How did this happen? Now, a compromise, when you compromise on one layer, it compromises the whole chain. This is what it shows, because this guy's got a lighter sentence. And in that regard, the statement continues to say, the learned magistrate continued to release all motor vehicles, including 2 LPG tankers, together with the confiscated LPG bulk, with a net weight of 4,660 kgs, despite the law providing for mandatory forfeiture. All right? So, during the arrest, they clumped up some LPG tankers and LPG itself, and that was evidence. Now, after all these compromises, now they're being released. They're being released, according to this statement by the Petroleum Institute of East Africa. Now, they continue to say that one of the LPG tankers, and procedurally released by the courts, was registration number ZC1286, which is one of the tankers involved in this incident. Compromise, compromise, compromise. I don't know. I feel they have even put here in bold, because I have to get to the bold quickly before I come back to Ken Gishinga. But despite the above actions and convictions, the proprietor continued. Did what? Continued operating the illegal storage and refilling facility without even a bare minimum safety standards. The regulator, EPRA, where are you? Petroleum Institute, they say this guy was a criminal. He found his way through and continued operating. Now it's close to 4 years down the line without bare minimum safety standards and qualified LPG personnel as required by law, leading to this unfortunate catastrophe, which could have been avoided should the letter and the spirit of the law have been followed. Ladies and gentlemen, do we have a country here? That's the question, because a country is a people collectively doing what they're supposed to do for the better good of the next person. Compromise in the judiciary, compromise in the regulator leads to such tragedy. Ken Gishinga, listening to Petroleum Institute's statement, what do you make of it?
Well, Noah, this is a very unflattering indictment of the judiciary. And this comes at a time when the president has publicly questioned the integrity of the judiciary. And events like this actually go and strengthen the president's argument that the judiciary really needs to be looked at, because not only is it presenting a risk to public safety, but it's actually compromising justice. Now you'll remember when Kibaki came into power, in the first 100 days, he undertook what was called a radical surgery of the judiciary, and that breathed in confidence in the country. So I think President Ruto will be watching this and will be saying, this is what I've been saying, and now people will listen a bit more.
Definitely. Ken, as we finish up this, many statements as we've gone through, and today we've just looked at the regulator, we've looked at the statement by the Petroleum Institute of East Africa. It screams this was avoidable. Now, as we finish up briefly, how do we seal these loopholes? You've called out there is a need to look at the different sectors. How do we avoid this, especially from a normal, as we call ourselves, mwananchi perspective? What can we do? Serikali saidia ama namna gani?
Well, I think now we have to look at the condition of the public service, from the national government to the county government. You know, anybody who's traveled outside of Kenya, particularly to the developed world, the US or Europe, they'll tell you it's very difficult to bribe a policeman. It's very difficult to bribe a state or a national official in those countries, because the living standards of those officials are quite high and people take pride in those jobs. So we have to come back to Kenya and ask ourselves, our county askaris, the county officers who should be patrolling these streets and reporting these incidents, are they well taken care of? You know, now if you pay somebody 20,000 shillings and he gets a brown envelope of 200,000 shillings, it'll be very difficult for him to look the other way. So I think it's back to looking at the quality of the public service. Are we taking care of the officials so that they can take care of us, or have we neglected them and now they're at the mercy of anybody who can throw some big amounts at them? I think if we can solve that, I think we can make some meaningful steps in the fight against corruption.
All right. Thank you very much, Ken Gishinga, for that closure. Strengthen public service. But in closing, in less than a minute, today we've looked at EPRA, we've looked at the statement by the Petroleum Institute. Still, many other stakeholders are to be questioned. Nairobi County, these are your people who've been hurt, and some lost their lives through this tragedy. What is your responsibility to avoid this? That is one. Of course, constituency level, we've seen the MP being very active on the ground, which is very critical. But at the same time, preparing Kenyans to be able and empowered citizens, so that when I smell gas through my window, I know there is a particular cause of action. And that cause of action is not deterred or discouraged by such reports that we've seen where somebody is criminally charged and 2-3 years after, they're still running the same business without proper safety features and even proper personnel, quoting the Petroleum Institute statement. We still have a lot to do. And we're just closing the week, but we're starting a new phase of interrogating how to keep each other safe in this country. I'm Noki Kimboy. That's been Business Today. Have yourself a blessed weekend. Up next, you have Mbio KTN. Stay tuned.